Greetings. We're now at stage 2, determining acceptable evidence and expanding and differentiating assessments. By now, you've completed your stage 1, collecting your standards, establishing your goals and objectives, and getting your enduring understandings and essential questions developed along the theme that you're going to be using for this unit. And now, to go with the bank of objectives that you've designed, we're going to make a bank of acceptable evidence, your assessments. So let's talk about assessment. We're going to kind of review a few things. Assessment can be used 4 ways: for planning and adjusting instruction, which is the formative; for diagnostic assessment, if you want to see what the student knows and what needs to be taught, which is different than formative in the sense that it also looks at the student's skills and abilities. Assessment expertise, going for mastery. Can they meet the standards? Do they meet the standards? Have they achieved what was supposed to be achieved, especially in some schools that do mastery learning? This is what how and what they assess. And assessments for selection and comparison, which you're not going to be developing, but students have to have tested on regularly, norm and criterion reference testing. All of this is to provide acceptable evidence of learning, both formative and summative. What shows you that students have learned what it is you're hoping they will have learned? So the assessment types include tests and quizzes, academic prompts, informal checks for understanding, performance tasks, observations and dialogues, and you can probably think of many others to be included in acceptable evidence. What we're looking for in your development of your units is a bank of the 3 types of assessments that can include any of these: formative, summative, and performance. So what is performance assessment? It's also known as alternative or authentic assessment, which means it just has to do with real life. It's a form of testing that requires students to perform a task rather than select an answer from a ready-made list or from some source. For example, a student may be asked to explain historical events, generate scientific hypotheses, solve math problems, converse in a foreign language, or conduct research on an assigned topic. Those are academic prompts that are also can be performance tasks if they are phrased in a way that is a developmental process rather than, well, we'll talk about the 6 facets of understanding, rather than just concrete answers. The quality of the student's work is judged based on agreed upon set of criteria, usually a rubric, and you always want to introduce the rubrics to the students and have them, sometimes they'll even create the rubrics for the performance task, or you do it together. What is not authentic? I study, I take the test, I pass it, I forget what I learned. That's not authentic assessment. So we're looking at what can make assessment relevant to the students, relevant to the learning, and useful to you as an instructor or as a teacher. Performance tasks. Here you see the pizza slice, and the task is double the sector angle and double the radius. Any slice. Well, I can't do that, but that's a performance task. Although there are right answers to this, it still takes it off the paper and pencil and into the real life. Why is that important to be able to double the sector angle on a pizza? I can't answer that question. They're used to see if the learners can apply their learning to various issues, problems, situations, and contexts. They reflect the 6 facets of understanding, which I'll go over with you in a minute, and also Bloom-Anderson's hierarchy of learning. You have the taxonomies. Establish real-world contexts, and I think I really want to reinforce the whole idea of real-world contexts. If you have to do role-playing, make it as close to what would really happen in the real world as you possibly can. Use the GRASP format for the design of culminating performance tasks to make them more authentic and engaging. A culminating performance task is a task that brings everything together at the end of the entire unit. You're being asked to scratch out or sketch out your ideas for those, but you will not flesh those out until 621C. So just be prepared that you'll come back to those. But the reason you're going to do that now is because you want to see where you're going with this and how it's going to bring you back to meeting that big idea, hitting that big idea, those standards that you're aiming for. are evaluated using valid criteria and indicators, reflective not only of the quality of performance but desired results. There's really always rubrics always contain qualifications, quality elements as well as what the content is and should be. The 6 facets of understanding designed by Wiggins and McTighe are summarized most easily when you see this quote: teach it, use it, prove it, connect it, explain it, defend it, and read between the lines. What does that look like? Explanation, interpretation, application, perspective, empathy, and self-knowledge. So any way that you can get a performance task or any of your assessments, we talked about culturally relevant assessments, to include these elements of 6 facets of understanding in them, the stronger they will be in terms of meaningful feedback for you and for the students, because that's really what it's for, meaningful feedback, which in turn gives you the instructional next steps, or the student recognizes that they still have trouble with something. What do they need help with? So how do performance assessments work? I'm just going to give you a few examples here. These are not Performance assessments are not limited to these examples. Open-ended or extended response exercises. Students might be asked to describe their observations, present arguments an historic character would make. What would Abraham Lincoln argue about the causes of the Civil War? Or you can, in the older students, you use satire cartoons. Now the name escapes me, but you see the one here with Uncle Sam and Woodrow Wilson, and there's a pile of money in between them. And he says, Woodrow, I'm proud of you. And like, what's the message here? What is the message? Why is Uncle Sam proud of Woodrow Wilson? What is it? What is that money about? And that's something that you would then study in your lessons for turn of the century. Extended tasks are assignments that require sustained attention in a single work area. And this is something you might consider for culminating performance tasks. Such tasks could include drafting, reviewing, and revising a poem. And then, of course, there's the whole topic and content area issue, and there's all sorts of things that can be surrounding that leads up to a particular poem. Conducting and explaining the results of a science experiment on photosynthesis using a multimedia presentation. Or writing, editing, and directing a short historical play, for example, the story of Ben Franklin and his kite. It varies, but extended tasks then become performance tasks. And portfolios, which are usually selections of a variety of performance-based work. And this is the only place where performance is actually not performance as in a synthesis. It is a synthesis, but it's not a performance that the student creates a project, but collects his or her good work over time, and it's collected in a portfolio, and it's evaluated according to the qualities needed in the portfolio to show parents, to show performance growth, performance on standards. An example of a multidisciplinary performance portfolio would be assessing 4th and 8th grade students in writing and math using 3 methods of portfolio, a best piece from the portfolio, and a set of performance tests. So it's all together. So the portfolio is actually combined with a set of maybe smaller performance tasks and a best piece from the portfolio itself. But you notice it is writing and math together. And maybe the writing includes some social studies content. So you've got a social studies standard, floating around in there, which can be articulated depending on what the unit of the lesson involves. So performance assessments take the perspective that assessment and instruction are inseparable aspects of teaching. They use a wide array of assessment strategies to determine how well students are doing, and this is particular portfolios, and to make instructional decisions. Always, even with a portfolio, you use systematic rating procedures. So if you have a rubric for a portfolio that you've decided to use for your unit, you include it in the unit. You include it in the appendices. Keep records of student performances on tasks and actively involve students keeping journals, evaluating their own work, whatever it takes for students to self-assess as well as for you to assess, because there should always be an element of self-reflection. The above methods, like all types of performance assessments, require that students actively develop their approaches to the task under defined conditions, knowing that their work will be evaluated according to agreed upon standards. Again, I can't reiterate enough how much important it is that students know how they're being evaluated. You all have your rubrics. You know what the rubrics involved. You know what's being looked for. You get a lot of feedback. Students need the same kind of attention. And also, this speaks to scaffolding the instruction. The well-defined conditions are not only the conditions upon which they will be evaluated, but the defined conditions, you're stair-stepping them and giving them sections of learning up to where you want to go to this objective and to this goal and to this standard. This requirement distinguishes performance assessment from other forms of testing because other forms of testing don't give agreed upon standards. They just say right or wrong. Ka-ching, there you are. So let's go back and remember about our objectives. Our objectives include knowledge and skills. The knowledge, what students should know about the Constitution in a unit would be general knowledge about the Constitution, reasons for the Constitutional Convention, role of the Founding Fathers played, how the Constitution affects our everyday lives, the process for voting for elected officials, how laws help citizens resolve conflicts. This goes way back to 621A. So, and then what they should be able to do, these are the skills. They should be able to vote for candidates running for office based on platform information. They should be able to extract information from books and articles about the Constitution or constitutional conventions for a chart, a diorama, or an infographic presentation. So there's this skill will be, I mean, the measure is in the objective. Really, they are just so intimately related. Evaluate the differences between two candidates running for office. Read and recite the preamble to the Constitution. Real low level, but some people just really enjoy doing that. I would never discount that as an assessment. And explain how laws are important for a civil society. So if we go then to what happens, you have your measurable objectives and what assessment, how you're going to assess those. And I chose 3. General knowledge about the Constitution. And the acceptable evidence for that one would be create a post-instruction survey asking my classmates if they can remember 5 of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution and make a graphic illustration of my findings to present to class. That is all 3 assessments. It's formative because as they build up to this, you are checking their understanding as they're creating this performance assessment. It is performance and it is summative. This is at the end. They're bringing information together, and once they're done here, you're moving on, which is basically what summative assessment is. Write 3-paragraph essay, how the Constitution affects our everyday lives. Write a 3-paragraph essay on how the language used to write the Constitution affects my life today. Like if this was a German student or a German ancestry, student with German ancestry. Or actually, that has to do with whether we would have English or German as our national language. I remember now why I wrote that, because that would make a huge difference to all of us today. It would be quite a shock if it happened all of a sudden. Number 3, the role of the Founding Fathers played in developing the Constitution. So you fill out a Venn diagram graphic organizer about 2 of the Founding Fathers and using that information and their differences and similarities, and write a compare-contrast 5-paragraph essay about them. Again, that would be formative and summative because a Venn diagram would be formative. You as a teacher would be monitoring that. The students would also know if they were getting it or not before they started writing the actual essay. Of course, you're dealing with multiple content areas. You're dealing with social studies, you're dealing with language arts, reading, writing, and speaking and listening. Who knows what else? Could be many, many other things. So we've looked at writing the assessments to match the objectives. Now we're looking at just how assessments are organized. And I'm including this because there are some people who like having a little structure to help them design their assessments. This is for you people who like a little bit of structure. And actually this is really important because I find if the assessment is weak, you get a lot of feedback and you have to redo and redo. So why not front load it and give you guys a structure that you can use so you don't have to redo it. So they obviously need to be related to the objectives. They need to include who is doing the action involved in the assessment, what the task is specifically, when and how the task is to be completed, and the content of the assessment, and the criteria that will be used to evaluate it. And it's usually implicit in the details. It may not include the whole rubric. No, that's not what I'm asking, but they'll know that these things have to be included in order to get passing grade. So here's the bad assessment. The objective is the students will be able to describe the different economic positions between North and South during the Civil War and hypothesize why they couldn't agree. And if you notice, I've included in that objective both knowledge and skills. They need to know the different economic positions and they need to be able to hypothesize. That skill of hypothesizing, taking data and making an educated guess. So the assessment is students will write their responses about Civil War in a journal and include a Venn diagram. Okay, this is not a good objective. So number one, if we go back, we're not sure if it is directly related to the objectives. Pretty sure it has something to do with, and I see that I didn't capitalize Civil War in the objective. To number two, who is doing the action involved in the assessment? Do we know that? Yes, we do. The students are doing it. Number three, what is the task action specifically? Write in their journal. Write what in their journal? And students will ask how much, what about? They'll want to have all the questions. If you have any questions about what that means, then it is not clear. When and how the task is to be completed. Number four, no. I don't know when I'm doing it. I don't know how often I'm doing it. I don't know when I'm done doing it. I don't know why I'm doing it. Number five, the content of the assessment. No specifics about the Civil War. What what about the Civil War? What are you asking? I think I need to work on my grammar on these slides. And the criteria of the task that will be evaluated. Number six, I have no idea if I've done it correctly. And what am I using the Venn diagram for? So if you gave me this prompt as a substitute teacher, or if you gave it to a student, we would have no idea what you wanted us to do. Would you know what you had to do there to show success on this objective? And I'm thinking the answer is no. So same objective, same bad punctuation or grammar, missing my caps. This is in two parts. The formative, but if you notice, they're intimately related, these two parts. The students will keep a daily log, so we know when, during the Civil War lesson unit, still during when, writing a one-paragraph summary. We know what, we know where, we know what it's about of the Civil War reading, and I can keep track of that with a checklist. I know that they've done it, and I can walk around and look and see if they're understanding and ask them questions if they don't, of the Civil War reading selection or movie of the day. Then B is the summative. At the end of the unit, and I know here's a when, and I know who, students will write a 5-paragraph essay, what, on their journal notes, with what, including criteria. One, an introduction to the problem, a description of at least one primary economic goal, a hypothesis based on their notes, and a conclusion stating how they think it could be solved. All those are the criteria. I said this is not a performance assessment, but an academic prompt, but really because they have to explain and hypothesize down here, it does actually qualify as a performance assessment. So they have met all of the basics in writing an assessment measure. And it doesn't matter what kind of assessment measure you're writing, all of these elements need to be in it. It doesn't need to be 5 paragraphs, and this is actually pretty long. But this is the assessment. And then if you gave me this as a substitute teacher, and if you gave me this as a student, I would have a very good idea what is expected of me in terms of my success in meeting the objective. And that's what you want. You want it to be very clear. And if you'll notice, all of this lends itself to your instructional activities. You're going to teach each one of these criteria. You're going to teach how to use the journal. You're going to use the content of what they're going to be watching in your instruction. So the assessments lead you right into instruction, and that's how it should be. So with review and apply resources in Module 6, use the template you've already started. You've got your template. You're going to put a bank of assessments that align with each of your lesson objectives in the unit. You're going to create a bank of assessments having all 3 categories: formative, summative, and performance. And these you're going to put it on the top assessment box with the other objectives. You're not going to put it down in the lesson. In the lesson, you're going to select your objectives and your assessments from the bank you write on the top, the 2 cover pages. So you're going to create your bank, and then you're going to select them for each lesson that you have, and those lessons will address those objectives and assessments. On the note-taking template, write some notes and ideas in response to the questions in the English as a Second Language section, which you're going to watch next. The completed graphic organizer will be collected in Module 8. Complete and submit your work anytime, and I'll give you feedback if you submit it before the due date or by the due date. Please don't send them in emails. So with that, I will leave you to watching the next installment of Culturally Relevant Instruction, which has to do with modifying instruction and creating relevant instruction for English as a second language learners, ELLs. Any questions? As always, I'm available for you to contact me.